Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I spoke once again with a regular guest, Paul Niland, who's been living in Kyiv in Ukraine for nearly 24 years. Paul, who's originally from Ireland, is a journalist, a political commentator, and the founder and CEO of Lifeline Ukraine, a national suicide prevention service. On the announcement of the very serious joke that is a 28-point peace plan that was cobbled together by Trump's administration and Putin, I just had to get Paul on the podcast to discuss it and the likely response from Ukraine. Paul, just days after Russian explosives had destroyed apartments just 2 floors above his own, he tells me in no uncertain terms what the response will be, and assures me that Ukraine is not on its knees and it won't be capitulating to Russia at any point in the future. We chatted about life in Ukraine, the conscription of civilians to the army, the thousands of abducted children, the resilience of the people, and how he believes this war will end. It is crystal clear that Trump is on the side of Russia, and what may not be clear is that while this is a huge issue for Ukraine today, it could easily be a similar issue for Europe tomorrow. Let's hear from Paul. Paul Niland, a huge welcome back to the Win Happy podcast. I'm going to ask the stupid question. How are you doing?
Greg, thank you very much for having me back on. It's nice to see an old friend. It's been some years that we've been talking, but I'm going to start off actually with an admission, if I may. I've never been a podcast guy. So I've been on several, but I was never a consumer of podcasts. But I've had some health issues, and it's given me time as I've been laid up and recovering and whatever, and I think I've sussed it. I think I know a little bit better how these things are supposed to work. So how am I? I wrote an article a couple of years ago for Byline Times, and when it came out, the headline was "Under Blackouts and Loitering Munitions." Right, so we're now back in that same kind of situation. But when I wrote this article back then, I remember saying, and sadly, I'm still a smoker. I spend time on my balcony, and I'm always looking at people. And I was looking at one of my older neighbors simply stepping off a paving curb, right? And she's clearly having some difficulty with her, movements. And I'm thinking she's just had to walk however many flights of stairs. And I included this. And I said, I'm a healthy, able-bodied guy. I don't mind bouncing up 6 flights of stairs, right? But 6 weeks ago, exactly today, one of my friends and neighbors collected me from hospital following spine surgery, right? So I ain't that nimble right now. My recovery is going well. But 10 days after coming out of hospital, having had surgery, my apartment building took a direct hit from a Shahed drone, right? And those things, they're not like a drone that you'll see on Amazon or whatever. It's not like a little quadcopter that you're going to, kids are going to play around with or whatever. These things are the size of a car, and they carry massive explosives. And as I said, I'm on the 6th floor, and it hit the 8th floor right above me. Those apartments on the 8th floor were trashed completely. There was fortunately nobody in them at the time, but had there been people at home, at least that have been seriously injured, probably killed. And that's a couple of meters above my head, 2 floors above my head, man.
God almighty.
Yeah.
And if the listeners haven't figured out at this point in time who you were and where you were, and we should probably tell them, put this into context. So Paul Niland is a journalist. You're the CEO and founder of Lifeline Ukraine. You were born in Ireland. I think you grew up in the UK. You've been in Ukraine now for how long?
It's 24 years almost.
24 years. You've been coming onto the podcast, these weird things that you know nothing about for the last 4 years, give or take. We spoke first the week before the impending invasion by Putin and his 250,000 idiots into Ukraine. And of course, they were on the border and we were asking, would he or wouldn't he, and what was likely to happen. So here we are, so many years on. You're in Kyiv, you're in the eye of the storm. And in a way, it hasn't been the eye of the storm for a big part of this war. It's the eye of the storm again now for the last 6 months. Would that be right?
Actually, it's in the last 12 months. It is since the re-election of Donald Trump that there's graphs, you can clearly see it. Like Google attacks on Kyiv during the full-scale invasion, and you see a big uptick in November of last year. And the casualty rate in Kyiv is 3.8 times higher year on year this year compared to last year.
Yeah, so that's thank you, Donald.
Mm-hmm. Putin's emboldened, right?
Yeah. And it feels like there's a parallel to the peace agreement in Gaza in a way. That while they were talking about that agreement that the Palestinians had nothing to do with, in reality, Netanyahu was bombing the shit out of Gaza every single day. His efforts seemed to escalate. And while we're talking about the 28-point plan that Trump and his buddy Putin seem to have cobbled together, it feels like exactly the same thing is going on. You know, let's spice things up. Let's turn the heat up in the kitchen while we're having these lovely peace talks.
Well, I mean, let me say, first of all, I rarely talk about the situation in the Middle East. I rarely talk about Israel or their actions. The only time that I did say something, and it was a Facebook post to friends and family, was on October the 8th. And I wrote then that, what had happened the previous day was I mean, just horrific. And I wrote then, I can only imagine what the Israeli response is going to be. Boy, I mean, like, I can't remember the exact words that I used, but I mean, we all saw what happened there. I mean, if you want to draw comparisons, simply the comparison is that there's an egotistical maniac in the White House who wants to be able to say that he's running around the world solving wars here and there, right? Many of those accomplishments that he claims credit for are nothing to do with him. I mean, for example, India and Pakistan, by claiming to have resolved that situation, which is far from resolved. They have enmities that go back from, a very, very, very long time. He has seriously pissed the Indian leadership off to the point that Modi goes up to go and hold hands and walk in the front line with the dictator from North Korea, with Putin, with Xi of China. No, there can be hopefully some return to ways of feeding the people who are starving as a result of what's happened in Gaza. Hopefully that is happening. That's not my topic. That's not where I go. That's not where I comment. But if Trump has taken some credit for his role in that, and he sees that there's a way of doing what he thinks might be something similar for Ukraine, then he thinks he's going to get his Nobel Peace Prize. And it's not necessarily Putin and Trump dreamed up the plan. It was Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, who is not a diplomat. He knows nothing about international affairs. He's a real estate guy, right? But he, together with Kirill Dmitriev, sat down and essentially just wrote out what Russia's wish list is again, because we've seen all of these points since 2022. Nothing has changed, right? We've seen it all, but Witkoff wrote it all down, transcribed it from what Dmitriev told him by and large, and then came back. And I mean, there was a previous point where Witkoff had misunderstood what he thought the Russians had said to him. And that was what led to the Anchorage summit. Witkoff came back, reported to Trump Putin's willing to make some kind of concession that he actually wasn't willing to make. It was when there was talk of a land swap, right? So potentially Ukraine might get some land back in exchange for something, right? And so Putin, Trump has gone, okay, fair enough, let's meet. Nothing came out of the Alaska summit. It ended early. It ended without comments to the press. And, they went their separate ways. But Witkoff has now come back in and again presented the same essential pile of shit. And Trump, who does not understand, and if he understands anything, it is that bigger countries get to call the shots and boss everybody else around, right? So he's just like, yeah, whatever, Steve, right? And now we're in this situation that we're in. I mean, we can get into the details of the plan if you want, or we can go back to what it's like being hit by a Shahed drone at 11 o'clock at night. Go wherever you want, mate.
Yeah. It feels like Santa Claus has asked Putin what would he like for Christmas, and he's given his full list, and then there has to be a conversation. Have you been naughty or have you been nice? Are you going to get all of those things on the list that you wish? And let's get into that in a minute. I wanted to give you some of the rhetoric and maybe some of the story that's kind of landing on this side of the world. Some of the bits that I've been listening to in the last week, these conversations, and they bring on these very knowledgeable people to make comments on everything. They say Zelensky is under extreme pressure because of a round of corruption in the government. So he's coming from a weak place. People don't want to fund Ukraine anymore because of this corruption. So that's one little story that's sprouting on one side. And you're taking big losses on the war front. And war is terrible. There's losses on every side. Any exaggerations about the Russian losses compared to the Ukraine losses, forget about them. There's equal losses on both sides. Russia is a much bigger country, so it can withstand those losses for a much longer period. So you're going to run out of road basically very, very soon. There's clearly been a huge escalation by Russia, including things falling on your roof. And at the same time, there's been no real change. It's all very, very incremental. Nothing is moving a whole pile. But to put a bow on all that, it's Ukraine and Zelensky have pretty much run out of road. You're in a weakened state. You're down on your knees, and the background for the 28-point plan. And the little 28-point plan, it came with a sting on the tail. You've got until next Thursday, sunshine, to accept this, or if you don't, you're on your own. Okay, I'm going to throw the ball back to you.
Right. Okay. I've made notes here. Right. I've got 4 points: corruption, losses, no change on the battlefield, and then blackmail. That's how I've noted them.
Yeah.
On corruption. Before we started recording this, I was watching, I've just refreshed my screen, Ukraine's biggest wartime corruption scandal explained by the Kyiv Independent. It's got 79,000 views. It was published 3 days ago. I'm 24 minutes into a 29-minute discussion between their deputy editor, Alexei, who I know is a very nice chap, and an anti-corruption expert called Daria Kalinyuk. And she is, I believe, I might get a title wrong. I think she's the director of the Anti-Corruption Center, or something as simple as that, like what it says on the tin. So she's an expert, and she puts things in exactly the right context. And there was one line just about 3 minutes back in from where I am now, so just about 20 minutes in, and she was talking about the EU's response, public response to what has happened, and she said, very matter of fact, in her professional manner, she's a wonderful, wonderful woman, and an ex. I mean, she's so dedicated. And she said, what the EU is saying is the position of Ukraine's civil society, and it always has been. So it's good that the EU continues to hold this pressure on the authorities, because our destination is in the EU. Ukraine will have to comply with all EU laws. Good. And a point that she made earlier on, which is the basic point that I've seen everybody make too is that the fact that these charges have been made public, that arrests are being made, that firings have been made, shows that Ukraine's anti-corruption systems, built since the Revolution of Dignity, are working. It was a very public test of them. They work. They work to the degree that people in the president's inner circle are targets of investigations. And the public response, it's very simple. Ukrainians stood on Maidan in the Revolution of Dignity, which began, yesterday was the anniversary, actually, 13 years ago, yesterday. And the position is we will fight corruption. We will not tolerate corruption. People who are corrupt deserve to go to jail for a very long time. We stood on that square for 93 days against corruption, right? It was hard. It was winter. It was cold. But we stood there and we forced Yanukovych and his corrupt mafia clan, we forced them to flee so that we'd rebuild and we'd fight that stuff. And we are doing it. And this is proof of it. So, there's going to be there's more investigations coming. And the further investigations, I believe, are in the defense procurement sector, which is going to be even more sensitive than the energy sector. And it's been, again, the position of Ukrainian civil society that corruption during wartime, it weakens the state and is therefore treason, right? So I'm not the prosecutor. I'm not the judge. I'm not going to be in court as a lawyer, trying any of this. But that's the feeling here. And we're proud of our anti-corruption success. We're proud of the events that we participated in to make that happen. I mean, the Revolution of Dignity was the foundation, not just the offices that are investigating this corruption, but for all of the declarations, the transparency that elected officials have to have with their assets, like all of these laws, all of these things that we've done. We're proud of what got us there and of the progress that we've made. So, shine a light. And you know what? It's very much like, I think, again, if you want to take something that's been turned into a two-sided situation, but it's really not, it's how the Democrats are responding to issues over the Epstein files, right? Okay, so the Republicans are trying to say it's a Democrat problem, it's a Democrat problem, it's a Democrat problem. The Democrats are like, if there's somebody I know named as doing bad shit in those files, bad stuff's going to happen. They're going to get what they deserve, right? So no, that's it. That's how we see it. That's the first thing.
Yeah, and to that point, Paul.
Yeah.
Corruption has been discovered through your systems, your processes. The people who are guilty of it are being tried. So your system is working. But you can see as well how it's a convenient story for someone with a malicious agenda to let it breathe in.
If you want a prime example of a person with a malicious agenda, latching onto this story as the latest reason to not provide assistance to Ukraine, it's the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I mean, this is now why we should stop supporting Ukraine, when he said this is why we should stop supporting Ukraine 48 times in the last 2 years. It's every month.
Yeah. Okay. That one has been kicked out of the park and dealt with. Point number 2, off you go.
Point number 2 and 3, losses and there being little change on territorial control on the battlefield. This is actually, those two things together intertwine in my last article, which, as always, it's my pinned tweet, right? So Paul Niland on Twitter, my pinned tweet is my last article. Putin's Dead End is the title of the article. And I mean, you talked about our first conversation when Putin's got 250,000 troops ready to invade, right? Okay. Imagine the entirety of that army being wiped out. All 250,000 of them, every single one. And then the same number again, and then the same number again, and the same number again, and I'm counting correctly. That's 4, and it's about to be the same number again. Russia is closing in on 1.25 million losses, right? That's dead, maimed, captured, whatever. It's 1.17 million now, I think it is, 1.18 million, whatever it is. So if we go back to the 28-point peace plan and the way that it was reported in Axios, so the only on-record comment in the original Axios story that broke this was from Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian KGB person who was tasked with dealing with Witkov. So he's on record, quoted in the Axios article, and he's like, this is, of course, against the background of recent battlefield successes for Russia. And when I read that Axios thing a few days ago, I quoted that, and I said, what successes? Like, and again, like I've put this in my article, their focus now is a town called Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk used to be home to, I think it was 16,000 people or 20,000 people. Like, I can tell you the names of the towns and cities that they've taken. So there was the initial blitzkrieg when they came in and they took swathes of Zaporizhia and Kherson, and then they took a big part of Kharkiv, and which they occupied for months, and they were coming after Kiev. I mean, it was everywhere from all sides, right? But in Donetsk, where we've had war with Russia already, since 2014, they've hardly moved. And the places that they've managed to take there after they've destroyed them are places you've never heard. They're places that if you'd have told the Russian population, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going to Pokrovsk, Avdiivka, Bakhmut. I mean, it's ludicrous that anyone would have said then at the beginning of this war that's not only the ambition of, but the capability of the Russian army, that's where they're bogged down, right? It's, like their advances for the rate of losses are insane to anybody who understands anything. I watch a lot of, on my, new podcast world, I watch a lot of military commentary. I'd been reading it on Twitter before, but I like the longer form, right? So, I mean, it's in any other army they're just absolutely unacceptable losses. But not only in any other army, according to any military professional, but in any democracy, there would be unacceptable losses. And like I wrote in the article, right? I mean, the scale of Russia's losses compared to anything like the coalitions that fought the long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, the nations have suffered terrible losses in those wars, but it's 20,000 people compared to coming up to 1.25 million for Pokrovsk and Solidar and Bakhmut. And I wrote about Bakhmut as well. I wrote that was Russia's culmination point, and again, that's a correct terminology. Culmination. They can go no further. They're done. They're spent, right? And that article's now probably 2 years old, right? And it wasn't even the regular Russian army that took the ruins of Bakhmut, as we know. It was Wagner. It was Yevgeny Prigozhin's guys. And he was screaming at the central command that he wasn't getting enough support, he wasn't getting enough. And then he lost it and recorded a video saying, this entire war is based on Russian lies. Prigozhin said that right before he began his mutiny to Moscow, obviously before he then gets blown up, right? But, no, it is the scale of their losses for the incremental gains, and incremental is not even the right word, like the minuscule gains, territorially speaking, it's the insanity of the war. But Putin's a dictator, and he doesn't have to answer to the court of public opinion, right? But here's an interesting thing. Before I get onto the last point of the blackmail, I read today while I was having lunch, while I was escaping from my blacked out apartment when we had our power cut. I read that the region of Yakutia in Russia is no longer able to pay the signing bonuses that it does to men when they enlist to come to Ukraine to kill people, right? So it's hard to do any kind of studies in Russia or gauge opinions or whatever. But when they've been asked, the main motivation for people to join up is money, right? And they get like $30,000 or something, and the wife's like, go and die. Great, 30 grand, I'm gonna have a car, I'm gonna have a fur coat. Off you go, right? In fact, there's women in Russia the black widows, they actually go around and they've married several of them, right? Because they know, no, seriously, they know it's a quick turnaround. Like, I mean, if the average length of service of a Russian being thrown in with no training to the meat grinder, if the average is a week, right? I mean, I don't know how long it takes formally for the divorce proceedings to go, or not divorce, but like, you know, the until that person can go on again. But it's lucrative, right? Every couple of months, they're just marrying another one and marrying another one and marrying another one, because they all just go off and die. Like, right? But Putin doesn't have to answer in the way that a democratic elected leader like Vladimir Zelensky, for example, does, you know, for the losses of those people. And so he just keeps sending them in. With regard to Ukraine's losses, this is something that I wanted to touch on in my article as well. Every single one of them is a tragedy. It is mourned by this nation. They are heroes. The angle that I put on that in the article was a response to some conspiracy idiots who claimed that there was a deal that was done, that we could have had peace from Istanbul in March 2022, but Johnson came to Kyiv and ordered. Like, so I said, Ukrainians are not fighting because anyone like Boris Johnson or Joe Biden told them to. Ukrainians have to fight because the Russians have invaded, right? We have no choice. So whatever the losses are at the end of this terrible war, that's because of Putin. It's all on him and his decisions, which brings me then to the final point that you're asking.
Yeah, but before you go to point 3, on the Ukraine side, it's real men who are out there losing their lives. And on the ground in Kyiv and wherever else in Ukraine, is there conscription when you're walking on the streets? Do you see men of a particular age? Do the men of those ages, do they believe, yeah, there's a bullet pointed at the back of my head? What is that like in an everyday sense around the city? Men of that age, their wives, their partners, their children, all of that.
There is what we call mobilization, which is essentially conscription. We're a nation at war, and therefore we live under conditions of martial law. And under conditions of martial law, men of fighting age can be called up. I've seen discussion. So, for example, one notable commentator on this war is Ben Hodges, and former U.S. General Ben Hodges. And he weighed in one time and he's like, people talking to Ukraine about their conscription age and who they should call up at what age and they should do this and do that. He said, shut up. It's none of your business. Ukrainians and only Ukrainians get to decide that. And so we'd had a situation where men from, I think, 18 to 60 were not allowed to leave the country. They've recently relaxed it because I think mobilization's 25 from 25. And so they allowed men between 18 and 24, if they wanted to travel overseas, they could. And lots of guys have availed themselves of that this year. There is conscription. I know people who've been conscripted. And I know people who volunteered on invasion day. A close friend of mine, I'm not going to go into too many details, but an extremely successful man in his sphere, and a very wealthy man in his own right, and a very good friend of mine, on the 24th of February of 2022, the first post that I saw from him was we have weapons, right? I saw him on my birthday last time, back in July. He's still doing what he's doing, and there's a lot of people like that. A lot of people like that. And another guy who I know, again, a very, very successful guy in agriculture, has been fighting like a lion, right? And I'm talking about really a captain of industry here in Ukraine, right? So yeah, people have volunteered to defend their country. People are conscripted to defend their country. They are all heroes. There are people who want to avoid conscription. There are people who are scared to go to war, which is perfect, completely natural.
Oh, completely
natural. And there are other people as well who are simply temperamentally not suited to that, and saying, why would you want me? I'd be rubbish, right? But I think in situations like that, they go, okay, so maybe you're not suited for going and doing an infantry assault after you've been correctly trained, but if you're a gamer, let's put you in a set of goggles and go and fly drones and kill Russians that way, right? So there are lots of ways that Ukrainians can serve, and there are people who do not want to for a variety of reasons. I've been stopped once to have my documents checked, but yeah, people have their identities checked to see if they're correctly registered. That happens. That happened.
And what that does to the psyche of people trying to live their ordinary life. The damage to people, and of course it's the men, I guess, predominantly of that age, but everyone connected to everyone who's living there. The damage to a country that has been invaded, and now you're living in this for the best part of 4 years. It must be mind-bending.
It is mind-bending. And I mean, I talk to my son all the time, but I was telling him the preparations that I made to adapt to these new blackouts that we have, these rolling blackouts. And I mean, including silly things like buying this torch so that, when I'm going out, I can see where I'm going, I mean, when I'm going to the bathroom, so I can have lights. I've rejigged things with extension cables and whatever. So I had this battery unit. When the power goes out, that kicks in. Depending on what the draw is, it can last for 2 hours, 3 hours, or 6 or 7 hours. So I worked out a way that I'm in my lounge kind of relatively okay. It gets colder because there's no heating with no electricity, but like going to the bathroom, you can't aim unless you can see where you're going, right? It's those daft kind of, and I'm talking to my son about this, and I'm like, how absurd is it that we're having a conversation that this is how people have to adapt their lives? Like, yeah, no, it's all of it. My best friend, I was texting him the day after we got hit by the drone. I sent him pictures of my apartment building so that he could see what happened literally here, right? And he came back. So I said I'd just come out of a hospital, and after discussing that, he's like, "How's your back?" Right? And I said to him, it depends what I'm doing. Day-to-day stuff, I'm limited with how far I can walk, how much weight I can carry, but it's okay. I said, on the other hand, it's not great for running away from Shahed drone attacks, right? Because what else are you going to say?
Yeah.
What else are you going to say?
For you, Paul, you've been living in this nightmare for 4 years. It was very threatening at the beginning. There was a part in the middle where maybe Kyiv wasn't as directly affected as other parts of the country. But now it's totally changed, and to the extent that things are landing on your roof. Has that changed you, that incident? It must have.
So let me first of all say that, Kyiv was a land invasion target right at the very beginning. So that was one phase. And the increased intensity that we face now is, as I mentioned earlier on, in line with Trump reassuming the presidency, and the implications of that can be seen here. But we've never been spared of violence here in the intersecting period. What used to happen was the Russians would stockpile a certain number of missiles and drones, and we would get a heavy attack, like a massive wave. And what they were hoping to doing it that way, was to flood the air defenses, right? So if we've only got a limited number, which we have a limited number of air defense systems for reasons of political decisions, nothing else. We could have plenty of air defenses here in Ukraine. They exist around the world, but we don't have enough air defenses and people die as a result. But what the Russians would do was it would be something like once a month. So there were regular strikes against Kyiv. There's always been a danger. The danger has increased. There's always been a danger of something that happen at any time. And I mean, you ask about how it's affected me by the direct hit on my building. I jump more. I'm more reactive to loud noises. That's natural. That's natural. I mean, it was fucking scary. Like, I mean, I'm sitting here. So my apartment building, massive complex. And so below me is the car park, and then there's another wing of the building facing me, right? So the drone hits here, the shockwave goes out, and so I'm looking at a whole bunch of plyboard stuck in window frames still a month after the hit, because the blast wave went over there and shattered all the glass. Like my inside my apartment, well, inside everything blew open. All of my windows blew open from my lounge where I'm sitting now, which, as I say, is that side, to my bedroom, my balcony off my bedroom, like the other side of the apartment. Everything blew open. I have one broken window pane at the back, and I've got a frame that doesn't sit. And so there's a horrible draft that's coming through there still. And now it's 3 degrees above zero today. It's going to be below zero very soon. But, you know, the blast, because there's so much glass around, the blast, this big yellow fireball reflected off everything around me, like just that instant, like it was 11 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden, boom, this big fireball going off. I mean, yeah, no, it was, as a result, an experience that has, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? I'm more angry, more determined, you know, and sorry, what I wanted to say to you about the effects on us all. One of the things that's always affected me, because I came back to this, the intersection period between now and the beginning, or whenever there's casualties in Kiev, when people are killed in my city, that affects me. That's always upset me, and so throughout this almost 4 years now, that's been a constant. Like people die on a regular basis in my home city, and that gets me. It upsets me. I mean, you know, we've just seen this awful tragedy in Ternopil as well. Let me mention that, right? So a cruise missile slams into an apartment building in a place called Ternopil, which you've never heard of, your listeners probably haven't. It's 1,000 kilometers from the front line. It's in Western Ukraine, right? So a cruise missile slams into a building. The death toll confirmed is 33 people, of which 6 were children. And there are 6 people one of which was a child, unaccounted for. And that is with the search and rescue operation now being completed. So they've gone through the rubble, and not only were these not bodies buried under the rubble, these are bodies that there was no trace of them remaining. They were vaporized in an instant by a cruise missile slamming into their apartment while they were in bed. 6 people vaporized, including a child, 33 dead, including 6 children. You know, and okay, let me use that as a segue to answer that last question about the blackmailing of Ukraine right now. Sign by Thanksgiving. That's disgusting in itself. Sign by Thanksgiving this deal, while the search and rescue operation in Ternopil was ongoing. The entire approach of the Trump administration to everything. The man is a disgrace in every single way. Every aspect of him is repugnant and repellent to me. But this right now, it's not just his ignorance. It's not just what I mentioned earlier on, that his mentality is, well, the bigger country gets to take over Greenland, stroke Venezuela, stroke whatever it might be in his lunatic mind right now. This, what he has attempted to do, everybody knows that this is a rehash of all of Russia's maximalist positions. And I see Marco Rubio now interestingly tweeting from his personal account rather than the sex data, the official account. This is an American plan. This was done with Russian input. Previously, we've had input, and we currently have input from the Ukrainians, right? So they know full well that there are parts of that plan that are just, it's not just that they're non-starters for Ukraine, they're non-starters for Europe, they're non-starters for a lot of people who are given obligations. Poland is given obligations in this plan to house European jet fighters that might at some point in the future be called into Ukraine. NATO is being given orders by Vladimir Putin that Donald Trump is accepting, where NATO troop displacement can happen, what makeup of troops can exist in NATO countries. That's what's being dictated in this, not just the bullshit to Ukraine, but I'm partisan. I am partisan. I am biased. I will be the first person to put my hand up and say I'm not on the side of the genocidal fascists. That's easy, right? That's easy. So I'm a little bit biased, right? But nobody can look at the demand to reduce Ukraine's armed forces 2.5 times from its present level of something like 1.82 million to 600,000. Nobody can look at that as anything other than a declaration of Russia's intent to come back for another go. So that's why we won't do it. And anybody with any common sense, my bias aside, being against the fascist genociders, right? My bias aside, any rational, sensible person knows that we can't do that.
Absolutely. We want to take your land. We're going to tell you what club you can join and what club you won't join. We're going to tell you how many soldiers you're allowed to have. Mm-hmm. And we're going to tell you what you'll have for breakfast.
While at the same time saying that we respect your sovereignty at the outset of the document.
Yeah.
We respect Ukraine's sovereignty, and here's all the ways in which it's going to be limited now. All those things you just mentioned. You can't have an army. You can't join this club. You can't do that. This is what you're going to have for breakfast. Come on. Here's another thing that's being missed as well that I'm always keen to point out. Many people are saying that what is at dispute right now is the status of the rest of the province, the oblast of Donetsk, right? It's not. It's not. And I go back, J.D. Vance, prior to the election, he was on a CNN show, and he was saying, we can already see really what the outline of a deal will look like. Ukraine's going to have to cede Crimea, parts of the Donbass will get it done. And I wrote an article then, and I said, I don't know whether he's being malicious or whether he's being deliberately disingenuous, but you're ignoring the land grab of 2022 in the aforementioned provinces in the south, across the Azov Sea, of Zaporizhia and Kherson, right? There was, since the war began in 2014 until the big invasion of 2022, there was no talk of people from those regions wanting to be part of Russia. But Russia marched in, and the reason why they marched in is because Crimea, the occupation of Crimea is not sustainable without a land bridge from mainland Russia. So that's why they took that. So we're not talking about a bit of the Donbass and they're Russian speakers anyway, and so should they, shouldn't they, where should they be, right? We're talking about tracts of land that are required by Russia to sustain the occupation of Crimea. And so that's why, going back before the election, when J.D. Vance is talking about Crimea and parts of the Donbass, it did not reflect the actual situation at all. And why conversations about the status of the rest of the Donbass now, and we can have that conversation, they are missing the big point. The big point is the land bridge. I mean, the big point is in solving the war, winning the war, bringing the war criminals to justice, getting reparations, rebuilding Ukraine, etc., etc. But the conversation is not about right now that status of that part of the Donbass. It's about all of the occupied territories, including Crimea.
I saw, I think it was a doorstop interview. Was it the former Prime Minister of Finland? Have I got this right? And she was asked about the 28-point plan, and I think she more or less said it needs 1 point. Russia just need to go home.
She's been saying that all along. I forget her name. I think it's Katya Kallas. Was it? No, Maria Sarin. She's been out of the office for a while, but she is brilliant. She is brilliant. Look, Finland, if you think that Ukrainians' attitudes towards Russians are hard, sit down and have a chat with the Finns. If you think, for example, let's bring it around to Ireland. There was a great Twitter conversation that I had that started off with Mr. Michael Wallace. He tweets something that there's a lady, I'm not sure who she is, but she's on an Irish TV channel. She's talking about the threats that Russia poses. He quote tweets it and says, this is all propaganda to fool you into thinking that Russia is a threat. It's just for the military industrial complex to make profit, or whatever his bollocks was, right? And so I replied to him, and I said, with regard to Russia, the lady makes 3 specific points. 1, 2, 3. Which of them is wrong? Right? And so Mick Wallace never responded, but I did get into some discussions with various other people who follow him and so on. And, the question is about preparedness and whether there is a threat from Russia. So if you look at Finland, who are neighbors with Russia, if you look at the level of planning that they've gone to for the event of a nuclear war, I mean, essentially the entire country can move into bomb shelters, right? I mean, it's quite phenomenal. But the degree of planning that a country requires to combat the threat of Russia depends on their proximity to Russia. And unfortunately, we've got the biggest land border with those bastards, right? It's what it is. It's what it is. The people of the Baltics, they not only know the threat, they know what it's like to be occupied and subjugated to the whims of whoever's sitting in the Kremlin. And no, thank you. And no, thank you. But a funny thing, actually, in that Twitter exchange, this one guy says to me, and I know, I've got the military terminology because it's forced into me, right? I have to have it, right? But this one guy replies to me and is like, right, he says, so for this Russian invasion of Ireland, he said, where are they coming? Please draw a line on a map, right? And I replied back to him and I said, I think you're a genuine person with a genuine question. But before I do answer you, can you think of other ways that Russia might try to interfere with Ireland other than the overt military operation you want to see it drawn on a map, right? And his response was, he said, well, they could drop a cruise missile on us, I suppose, but what would be the point, right? And I'm like, dude, a cruise missile is an overt act of military action. But I mean, what they are doing there through people like Wallace and Daly, who was his cohort when they were in the European Parliament spouting Russian nonsense, what they do is they do influence operations. And what they do throughout Europe, there's a recent Channel 4 documentary about it, is they hire local criminal gangs to go around bombing places, setting fire to places, etc., as well as their own activities on European soil with their Group 29155, who are the people who went and tried to assassinate Sergei Skripal. All of that kind of stuff, all of their dirty operations, the blowing up of arms depots in Czechia and attempting to murder Bulgarian arms manufacturer CEOs. The German Rheinmetall CEO was also the target of a Russian assassination plot, and they supply military equipment to Ukraine. Like, the threat from Russia is very much European wide. It's not just this war against my home country now, it's all of us.
Yeah, of course it is. So Zelensky responding and Ukraine responding to the 28-point plan, How is this week going to evolve?
I'm just scratching my nose. I just looked at it as how awful a statement of the state of affairs in general. That when Zelensky last went to the White House, not last, I think the time before, when he had to go with Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron. I mean, like it was a whole delegation that was required to go and tell Donald Trump, Ukraine's the victim, Russia's the bad guy, right? And that is what is now going to happen. Like I said, this 28-point plan is not just about Ukraine. And here's another point that I made as well. This 28-point plan, it's basically, there's 4 buckets, right? Number 1 is Ukraine, and then there's number 2, number 3, and then number 4 is US-Russia restoration of relations, trading cooperation, economic benefits, et cetera, right? So when this plan gets presented to Trump, Trump looks at number 4 and doesn't give a toss anymore about what was in number 1. That is something that the Russians have just very skillfully played by bundling all together as some kind of grand bargain, with the ultimate being the ultimate prize, Russia-US relations. There they are. Screw what we had to go through, point number 1, to get there, right? And what is going to happen, like the going into the White House mob-handed with allies, the Americans are going to be rebutted not only by Ukraine saying, we will not accept this reduction in our armed forces, that would be insane. It's a recipe for another phase of war, obviously. Those things are going to be explained to the administration of Donald Trump by Ukraine's other allies, including the Finnish, including the leaders of the Baltic countries and the leaders of the EU and anyone else who gets this shit.
So we are not a broken people. We are not on the floor. We are not horribly corrupt, and we are not on our knees to the extent that we have to accept all this before next Thursday.
I'll tell you another little anecdote from Kyiv. When I was out having lunch today, a gentleman and I assume his wife walked in. He was in fatigues. He carried a couple of medals on his chest, and sitting in my booth here, I'm looking at that guy there, and then at some point I noticed him smiling. And I looked to my left, and I knew there was a family there, and that family had a child with them who was probably about 5-6 years old, something like that. And the kid was just being cute. And I looked at the hero with the medals on his chest, and smiling at that child, and my immediate thought is, he knows what he's fought for, right? That's what it is. That's what it is. The future of Ukraine and the people who call this home. That's what's being decided right now, and it ain't going to be decided by Thanksgiving.
How do you see it playing out, Paul?
There is one way that this war ends, and it is with the collapse of the Russian war machine, stroke economy, stroke ability. So their ability to further invade, they can cause terrorism throughout the country, but their ability to further invade is essentially nullified. And if they're not finding money for more bodies, then it's going to be reduced as well, right? So their ability to invade further is wiped out, essentially. Hence the minimal territorial gains for the Russians, though they do happen, and it's a terrible tragedy for the people who had lived in that city, right? For their city to be destroyed and the ruins taken over by Russians. It's an absolute tragedy. But their ability to continue to man the war, to finance the war, all of that has to be choked. And what Ukraine is doing in the way that we've systematically built up the capacity to do this over the last several years. And now we are systematically wiping out their oil, gas infrastructure, their energy infrastructure, and various other strategically important objects inside of the Russian Federation as well. And the brilliant thing is that we're demonstrating that they're naked in terms of air defense. Like, we've just hit a massive power station on the outskirts of Moscow with repeated waves of drones, and they got nothing. I see tracers going up like that. I mean, it looks like it's not much more than small arms fire trying to handle this incoming attack from Ukraine. So, we will continue to do that. And if I again refer to General Ben Hodges, he's always said that the ultimate point when the war ends is when the occupation of Crimea is untenable. And so that brings me back to why I said Kherson and Zaporizhia are so very important, because the occupation of Crimea is untenable without those two places. Yet the Donbass, right? That is what it is. There will be conversations about how stupid it is to say, well, the Russians speak us, so give them up. We can discuss all of that, but it's the land bridge to Crimea. We break the land bridge to Crimea, and then they cannot continue the occupation of Crimea. We destroy all of their military facilities in Crimea. They have no way of holding on to it. That's well underway. Their military capacity inside of Crimea itself has been degraded. The Black Sea Fleet is no longer, I mean, it is in the Black Sea, but it's over in Novorossiysk, in Russia itself. Like, I think that's how the war ends. That's how the war ends. And the hot part of the war, and then, the International Criminal Court's warrant for the arrest of Vladimir Putin will not have been rescinded by Donald Trump.
Red carpet.
Right? It will not have been rescinded because Donald Trump doesn't have the authority to rescind that arrest warrant, which is also part of the plan. Right? So that's where it ends. Not just Putin, but the rest of them as well. The ones that have prosecuted this war, the propagandists who created the environment for it, they all need to see justice, and it will be Russia's frozen central bank assets that will be used to end the war by purchasing military equipment for Ukraine, and then that will be contributed to the reconstruction of Ukraine to pay for their destruction. That's how it ends.
What about the children, Paul? The Ukrainian children who were taken by Russia?
I thought you were going to ask one of two questions, either the ones about the children abducted or how children are getting on in these conditions.
Well, maybe both, yeah.
I'll answer the one I made up, not the one and then I'll answer the one that you asked. Again, walking out in the evening, in the dark, there's a play park very close to my home, and I walk past it every time I go out. And a few evenings ago, there was little children there, toddlers, 18 months, 2 years old, and their parents, one on a swing, and the parents are holding the phone light on so that the kid can play on the swing a little bit, right? And as the kid's going backwards and forwards like that, with the video that I took, he's like kind of crossing the light, so you can make out that it is actually a kid on a swing. And then I pan around, there's another kid on a roundabout as well on the other side of the park. But the resilient people who will do whatever it takes to live however we can in these conditions. The children who have been abducted by Russia, the first thing to say about that is that those were not children that were in harm's way, insofar as they could have been casualties of the battlefield exchanges, right? Because what Russia does, like what it did, for example, what it's doing to Pokrovsk right now, is it destroys it from afar, right? It destroys it with artillery until there is nothing, until there's nobody left, until it's uninhabitable, and then they will come in because there's no point in defending it anymore. When there's no people there anymore, Ukraine will get to the point where they just go, okay, right, and whatever. So Russia isn't taking kids out of harm's way, because Russia's not in those cities. It is bombing them from afar, right? Where Russia has abducted these children from is the occupied areas that came in the Blitzkrieg at the beginning of 2022. The official number, I believe, is 19,700, which in itself is a scale of not just a war crime, which is what Putin has been charged for, but But a specific definition, there are 5 definitions of genocide according to the United Nations Charter. And the 5th of those is the forceful transfer of children from one group to the other, right? So it's not just a war crime, it is an act of genocide that Russia is carrying out. 19,700, I believe, is the official number. It's suspected that it might be 200,000. We really don't know because we don't have access to the occupied areas. We can't see what's going on in the occupied areas. So who knows? But of those, there was a list. There's an organization. It's run by a guy called Kuleba. I think his name is Mykola Kuleba. No relation to the former foreign minister Dmitry Kuleba, but he runs this organization called Return Ukrainian Children or something. And they go through this process on each individual case where they're finding the documentation, they're finding the relative, they're facilitating this, they're organizing that, tracking people down and all the rest of it. And it really is case by case by case, right? So there was a meeting about, I'm going to say 9 months ago, between representatives from Ukraine and representatives from Russia. And the Ukrainians handed over a list of, I believe, 297 names. I could be slightly wrong on that figure, 297. And it's basically like, here's all the absolute simplest cases, just these ones now. The easiest ones to identify. Here's 297 of them that are unquestionable. Give them back now. The Russians have not returned one of those 297. Just those 297. And then is it 19,700 or 200,000 children that they've taken? And the woman who is co-accused with Vladimir Putin by the International Criminal Court of this war crime of abducting these children. She's an awful, awful person. Her official title is she's the ombudsperson for children's rights or human rights or whatever it is. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. She recently did an interview with her own propaganda channels where she's talking about the child that she and her husband got from Mariupol, right? And how at first he didn't like the Russian songs or the way that she was teaching him to love Mother Russia and all the rest of it. And she essentially admits to having brainwashed this out of him, to having coerced this out of him so that he's now a happy Russian child. And she admits this. That's what they're doing on a massive scale, a massive scale. Children that have relatives here in Ukraine and children that have been ripped away from their home country and are being forced into brainwashing centers. They're being forced to do military youth training, to join the Nashi youth group of Putin's movement, which, sounds far too like Nazi for them to have made a mistake in naming it like that.
Yeah, this is their 4th Christmas away from Ukraine.
Really saw a story of one kid who was repatriated to Ukraine days before his 18th birthday, when he was going to have been conscripted at 18 years old.
It is disgusting. It is disgusting. And we were talking about our good friend Trump, who rolls out a red carpet for Putin, and he decides to gang up on Zelensky, which he will inevitably do again this week when all of that stuff kicks off. I'm judging the resilience of the Ukrainian people 100% on your resilience. And I'm going to judge from that it's not faltering anytime soon.
It's not faltering anytime soon. We know the realities of the situation. The reality of the situation is that we're at war because we were invaded. And until that stops, we will be at war, right? Even if through Dmitriev and Witkov, Putin has managed to wave the incentive of money under Trump's nose for him to have abandoned anything that was in point 1 of the bucket 1 of the peace plan. Even with that, we know what the situation is.
This will be the 4th time I'm asking you this question. Do you know what it is?
Am I putting up a Christmas tree?
Yeah.
Hey, I'll tell you a story, actually. This glass, this single only Christmas present that I have received since the full-scale invasion. True story. True story. No, I'm not going to be putting up. I mean, I'm not going to put up a Christmas tree. I'm not putting up decorations. We're not in a festive place. If I were overseas, if I was spending time with my son, then I'd be in a different place and literally, as well as figuratively, and might be open to that. But here, through the blackouts, through whatever, waiting for the window guy to come and sort my balcony out so I don't freeze my ass off when I'm asleep. I mean, we're not observing Christmas very much. Let's put it like.
Yeah, it's not the ultimate two fingers to Putin, no.
The ultimate two fingers to Putin is that we continue to function. A good friend of mine, Peter Dickinson, I wrote for the Atlantic Council on many occasions, but Peter's one of the top guys for the Atlantic Council, and he's written a recent piece. I haven't read it, but I read his commentary where he's saying that even that, right? Let's say that Russia ended up controlling de facto, not de jure, 20% of Ukraine. There's 80% of Ukraine that remains a democratic and functioning state that will only point towards success, and that means that Russia has lost. And what Peter's arguing is Putin can't stop the war because he can't allow that, right? You have to realize that that's the situation. And it's right. If 80% of the legal, internationally recognized landmass of Ukraine is free and continues its path of fighting corruption, right? It continues its path of membership in the world's greatest ever trading bloc, the most successful trading bloc in history, right? We'll go and do that, and Russia's lost. Even if it were just like, leave it as it is today, boys, stand back, right? Russia's still lost because there is this democratic Ukraine that's going to continue to be successful.
And even if it does end up gaining some territory that shouldn't be theirs, what is that going to look like? You're ruling over a people who want nothing whatsoever to do with you? On what planet can that be a victory?
That's exactly the point. Like, it is the people who are there.
Yeah.
Right. And those people, and again, like, you can come and test it. Right. I mean, if you want to now, you can go to the parts of the Donbass that Russia does not control. Right. You can go to those cities. There is a risk, obviously, because some are within strike. I mean, they're all within striking distance. If Ternopil on the other side of the country is within striking distance, any of us are. But you can go to the Ukrainian controlled parts of Donbass and you can ask those people, do you want to be under the jackboot of fascist Russia, or would you rather be in democratic Ukraine? And I know what the answer is. And before 2022, because I was going to say, Elon Musk tweeting out is like, I got a brilliant plan. Let's have UN-backed referenda in those disputed provinces to see who they really want to be with. Like, you moron. You muppet. Why would you think that they wanted to be with Russia? Why would you think that they want to be in a fascist dictatorship? And prior to their invasion of 2022, you could go to any one of those cities along the Azov coast, and I can name them, from Mariupol through to Berdyansk, down to Kherson. You could go to those cities and you could say to them, because it's in a free country, Ukraine, you could say to them, where do you want to be? And Musk, after the invasion, is unaware of this. Well, who knows? Maybe we should do a referendum. No, they could have been asked at any point. There was never a political movement. Not even the Donbass. There was never a political movement in Crimea to rejoin Russia, other than the one that was headed by a guy called Sergei Aksyonov, who ended up being the person that Putin put in charge. And his party had got, I believe it was 3 seats in a 100-seat parliament. And he, by the way, is obviously a organized crime boss. And so that's who Putin's partner is in Crimea. There was never a popular movement in Crimea for them to be joined with Russia.
Well, Paul, hearing this news about the 28-point plan and some of the other noise around it, I was really concerned. And that's why I sent you that DM on Twitter. Just saying, what's the story here, Paul? And I got a fairly sharp answer back. And thank you for coming on the podcast today and clarifying it. I would like if you put that Christmas tree up, but for me it is a bit of a fuck you to Putin and all of that. I'm still going to celebrate Christmas regardless. You're not going to take that from me. I don't care what you're doing, but you're not taking that from me.
You go ahead, man. Although I've had conversations with people in Ireland about what a Russian invasion or cruise missile hit might look like, you guys live in the most wonderful, wonderful country, I believe. And as you should, with your family, enjoy the holidays, celebrate well, drink too much, eat too much, fall asleep and fart in front of the fire and film and everything else, and have a great time, man. And thank you again for inviting me to come back for a chat with you and talk to your audience.
I guess in a way, Paul, just the fact that you're saying that, I think when we heard about the invasion back in 2022, there was this idea that how in the name of God could this be happening in the world right now? And Ukraine, that's part of Europe, in our mindset. It's all part of that modern Western world and everything else. That's how we kind of view it. So it was shocking her that this could be going on. And we're privileged. We're privileged to be here. And Jesus, maybe that can change someday.
Listen, I don't know what I said to you a week before the invasion, but I know what my feeling was at the time and what I was saying to people and where I was right and where I was wrong. And what I said was a couple of things. I said that the intent of the invasion would be the land bridge to Crimea. I was stating that before the invasion came. I know why they need it. And strategically, that is their only gain from this phase of the war, right? So I said they'll go for the land bridge to Crimea. And then I said there's going to be a big and bloody war around the Donbass, breaking out from the conflict that had been ongoing already for 8 years at that time. And the other prediction I made is that they ain't coming for Kyiv because that would be insane, right? So I was right on two of the points and completely wrong about the third. That's not even audacity. To think that they would walk into this city and take it over and subjugate the people who live here? I recall on the 24th of February, you know how you get a sound associated with a certain event, right? So when I hear suitcase wheels running along paving tiles, that takes me back to the 24th of February. That was all I heard all day. Cases being dragged to cars, people getting out of Dodge. A lot of people did go because there was the imminent threat of the Russians coming into Kyiv. But before that happened, I was like, no. That'd be madness. I mean, it was, but they came. They had to go.
I hope at some point, and not too distant into the future, you might hear those wheels, and it's my little case coming to see you.
I'll be happy to take you to a couple of places that serve a reasonable pint of Guinness. It's not as good as at home, but it does.
But Paul, you're a gent. Are you playing music, by the way?
Yeah, I am actually. I again, with my health issues that I've had, I've been away. I just haven't had the mood. But I did. I picked up my guitar last week and just bashed out, like, for not having touched it for months. Actually, I just bashed out a few songs that I enjoyed. Pink Floyd, Cat Stevens, and I probably played 4 Non-Blondes. And then last night again, I was in the mood. I picked up my guitar. But you know what? So a lot of my friends are professional musicians. And so when I said I'm going to do this, like, I've been friends with them for years and years, but I didn't play. And when I said I'm going to do this, I got sent to boot camp. So my music teacher, he was set a task to instruct me in a certain way. And the way that it is that it's there forever. Even if I don't, as I've discovered, if I don't touch a guitar for months, I can just pick it up and play, right? Because my friend sent me to music boot camp.
Well, on that topic, I'm going to set you a task.
Go on.
So I want to record again with you before the end of the year, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And maybe even during the holidays, the Christmas holidays. We'll both need a drink when we're doing the recording, so that's part of the deal, if that's okay. You good with that? Yeah. and what I want from you is your recommendations for a must-listen-to album for every month of 2026. An album a month.
All right, I can do that. And, we touched on my son earlier on.
It's Sasha, isn't it?
Yeah, Sasha, yeah. He sent me a message 2 weeks ago. He's like, when you rediscover a song and it's like one of these all-time classics, and he's talking about a Beatles song, right? And so I screenshotted this, sent it to my mate who's a professional musician. Who came back and he's like, "Attaboy." So Sasha just wrote to me today, and now he says, "Dad, the same again." He says, but David Bowie. I think it was Starman. Was the song, and I wrote back to him and I said, "Sorrow, you have to listen to Sorrow. You listen to David Bowie. That's not the most famous song, but it's certainly one of the most.
Yeah.
Right?
It's so exciting discovering music.
I'll do a list of music recommendations for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Until then, my good friend.
Deal.
Be safe. Jesus, be safe.
Not within my gift.
I know.
But I appreciate the sentiment.
Yeah. Take it easy. Thank you, Paul.
All the best, Greg.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you would like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.